So welcome everybody to Nerds with Appliances. We're doing vCenter server migrations, going from Windows to the vCenter Server Appliance. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to go through quick introductions. We're going to talk about some news going around vCenter Server. Hopefully you're aware of what's going on. If not, we'll do a recap. Then we'll go into the actual migration process. We want to kind of walk you through the steps and get you from a Windows vCenter Server cleanly into the vCenter Server Appliance. We'll talk about automation. And then we got some special topics in section 5 around vCenter Server topology, post-migration. And then we'll cover some questions. So my name is Emad Younis. I'm a staff technical marketing architect within the Cloud Platform Business Unit. I cover vCenter Server, which includes migrations, as well as VMware Cloud on AWS. You can find me on Twitter, @Emad_Younis, and I also have a personal blog.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is William Lam. I'm a staff architect working on VMware Cloud on AWS. I drive our internal customer zero initiative around providing early feedback around usability design and also focus on integration and automation of VMC. You can find me on Twitter as well as my personal blog. So just to recap, we're going to cover some news just to make sure that you guys are all on the same page in case you missed some of these updates over the last couple of 12 to 18 months. Is there an echo? Yeah. So hopefully you guys aren't surprised by this, but Windows vCenter Server has been deprecated. This was announced last year. You can go to this short URL for more details, but the update here is that 6.7 will be the last release containing the Windows distribution. So the next vCenter release will not have a Windows distribution, so definitely start focusing on migration. I'm sure that's what a lot of you guys are here for. I don't think anybody's sad about this. In case you guys are, the Flash client is going away. It's also been deprecated. This was also announced last year. And 6.7 will also be the last release, right?
Yeah. Woo! We do actually have one guy who's not happy about that.
Go outside. Onto some cool news. We do have the HTML5 client that's been in development for the last couple of years now. Team's working really, really hard to bring feature completeness to the capabilities. And I think in 6.7, I think we're like in the high 90% percentage. So you can really start using day-to-day activities using the HTML5 client. We know that there are still some functionality that's not there today. And so in their upcoming 6.7 U1 release, we'll have full feature completeness between the UIs. And they've also been adding a lot of neat features. So once we get the port over, one cool feature that I actually ran into when I was using U1 is they've actually enhanced some of the workflows, one of which is adding hosts, but rather adding a single host. We now have the ability to add bulk hosts and editing passwords and licensing all in one given flow. So going forward, you'll start to see really, really cool things in the H5 client, so we don't have to worry about this whole Flash conversion. We recently released a Fling that actually includes a code capture. This is the evolution of Onyx. So now you can perform an operation in the UI. Once you stop the play button, it'll actually generate Power CLI code that you can use and copy and do some automation. So really cool stuff coming. Hopefully this is not applicable for anybody, but vSphere 5.5 is end of life. You guys have about under a month's time to migrate off that platform. If this is applicable, please step outside and start the migration and come back into the room when you guys are ready.
So who here is still on 5.5?
Oh, that's a lot of
wow.
guys. Oh,
okay. We got a lot of migrations to do.
Yeah. And then just really quickly on the upgrade scenario, obviously there's more details in the release notes. What I wanted to call out here is that for any customers that have moved to 6.5 Update 2 and want to move to 6.7, today it's not currently possible. And the reason for that is 6.5 Update 2 came out after 6.7. But with the upcoming 6.7 U1 release, you'll have the ability to upgrade directly to 6.7 U1. So just call that out. And again, take a look at the release notes, interoperability matrix for any kind of standard upgrade procedures. Okay, so now we're going to get into the overview and kind of walk you through the VCSA migration process, and then we'll take you through a couple of workflows just so that you guys are on the same page before we jump into some of the more advanced and more interesting topics. So first and foremost, a vCenter server migration going from Windows to the appliance is both a migration as well as an upgrade. This is something that generally gets missed, and the whole point of this is really we want to reduce the amount of downtime that you guys have to take for both the migration as well as the upgrade, so this is tied, interlocked together. So really keep this in mind as we go through the deck, and you'll see why this is important later on. So from an identity standpoint, we migrate everything about the source Windows VC. This includes things like IP addresses, certificates, also FQDNs, MoRef IDs. And so from a third-party solution, if you have products like VROps, VRA, or any kind of third-party solutions that talk to vCenter, when we perform the migration, after the fact, these solutions won't even realize that it's been changed, right? Because they're talking to the vSphere APIs, and all that information is migrated across. And so from a third-party solution standpoint, from an end-user standpoint who's logging into the vSphere UI, you won't even realize that you've been switched from Windows to the appliance. And in fact, we actually even have some customers that do that without telling their customers, and when the vSphere client is back online, they said, nothing's really changed, right? And that's really the whole point. From a database standpoint, we support all the different embedded and external databases that we've supported over the years. So as long as it's still within support, we have a path forward for you guys. And then lastly, we have a really easy rollback story. When we perform the migration, we power off your source Windows VC, and we don't touch it at the fact, right? So if you do run into some issues and you need to roll back, simply power off the new appliance and power back on your source Windows VM, and you're back in business, right? So from a rollback standpoint, really, really easy. The migration process is actually broken down into two pieces. The first is running a migration assistant, and I'll dive into a little bit on what that entails. And then second to that is going to be actually running the migration tool, and this will be the process of actually connecting to your source Windows VM and pulling the data out and then starting the actual migration, and then eventually the upgrade process. So the migration assistant, like I mentioned, is a utility that you run. You can run this on your source Windows VC. It has no impact, so it doesn't make any changes to your application. And what it does is it does a number of pre-checks to ensure that you have the FQDNs correctly set up. You know, in case you have certificates that are expiring, it will actually detect all these things to make sure that your environment is healthy prior to starting a migration, right? So it's kind of like a pre-check tool. And the nice thing about this, like I said, you can run this prior to running your migration. It also gives you some feedback around what kind of size of your VC. So if you start out with maybe like a medium-sized Windows VC, but you've grown the environment, it'll detect that and give you some recommendation on what the proper size for your next appliance would be. So that way you're able to scale up to the VMs and you don't have to take downtime of resizing the VM's memory or CPU.
Yeah, just remember you cannot go any smaller than the current size. You can go bigger, but you cannot go smaller.
Okay, and then after that, so once you have the migration assistant running, this is something that's persisting because it's also acting as a transport mechanism to transport the data over to your appliance. So you keep that running, and once that's running, you go ahead and start the migration utility itself. This is bundled as part of the VCSA installer. You could do this through the CLI as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the automation section. But if you go through the UI, you'll see that there's this migrate option. You go and click it, and what you'll need is a temporary IP address, but you only need one. So even if you're migrating from an external PSC and a VC, the nice thing about this is that you only need the temporary IP address while it does that conversion. Once it's done, it frees up that temporary IP address, and you can then use it for other migrations. So if you have multiple vCenter servers, multiple PSCs, at any given point in time, you only need a single IP address, and so you don't need to allocate additional IPs for this process.
I would say the other thing on that slide, if you don't mind going back, is the Active Directory account. So if your vCenter or PSC are joined, depending on your embedded versus external, if you're joined to the domain during the migration process, you will need an account that has rights to be able to update the object within Active Directory. So keep that in mind as well.
Okay. As part of the migration, you have the ability to also extract out performance and events and tasks. Obviously, this will take a longer duration when you do the migration because obviously you're going to have a lot more data, so this will really depend on your retention period. One of the capabilities that we release in 6.7 and beyond is you have the ability to specify a deferred import. So before it was either you want all the performance data to have a to have completeness of your data set, or don't import the data, and so to have a faster migration process. In 6.7, we allow you to do a deferred import, and what that means is if you have an external database, when we actually take downtime of the VC to actually migrate the data, you're not up and running. So one of the nice options here is you want to defer the import of the data and you want to keep that performance, keep all the events and stats. When you do that, we basically get vCenter up and running, all the configuration and inventory up and running, and now you can start provisioning VMs. If you need to access historical stats, it won't be available immediately, and that's actually happening, being imported in the background. And if you actually go and click that option, once VC is up and running, you can connect to the VAMI UI, and you can see progress on your actual imports of the performance stats. And once this is completed, then you'll have full access to all the stats that you've been collecting for your source Windows vCenter. You also have the ability to pause the import at any point in time. And of course, you can also resume it. So you can get full visibility of this process. And this is also available through the APIs. And so you can actually do this programmatically, run a little job, and then it'll ping you when it's actually done.
It actually shows you now how long it's going to take as far as the migration process.
Now, we have a lot of customers who use Update Manager. Some customers actually don't want to carry that forward. The migration assistant actually does help migrate that data over for you, but a lot of environments might be starting from 5.5 or 6.0 where there's a lot of old baselines, a lot of old images, and they just want to start fresh. So the migration assistant will detect, if you have solutions such as Update Manager, and it will bring the information across. For customers that don't want to bring VUM across, all you have to do is just unregister VUM with your current VC. Migration assistant will not detect the plugin, and it won't copy the data across. And so you just need to follow this KB, run a couple of commands, and then you can unregister VUM if you don't want to convert that across. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Emad, who's going to take you guys through some of the workflows on VCSA migration.
All right. So here we have a scenario where I have a Windows vCenter server, I have my external database, and I have my Update Manager also running on a Windows box. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to run the migration assistant on Update Manager. Now, if you have Update Manager residing within the Windows vCenter server as well, you don't have to do this step. You can actually skip it and go directly to the Windows vCenter server and run the migration assistant there. Next, we're going to run the migration assistant on the Windows vCenter server. Once everything is good and the migration assistant says ready for migration, we're going to go to our jump box. Now, this can be any box that you have within your environment. It can even be your laptop, as long as it has routable access to the Windows vCenter server that you are migrating. From there, once we run the migration tool itself, it will automatically deploy a vCenter server appliance for us. Now we're going to bring over the identity. So as far as any solution like William was talking about earlier is concerned, it's the same old vCenter server. We're bringing over that identity. Then we're copying over our config, our inventory. Now that comes over by default. There's nothing you need to specify there. And that includes things like your number of VMs, the hosts, all the configuration, HADRS, etc. And yes, the virtual distributed switch is included as part of this. There's nothing else you need to do. You don't need to move VMs from distributed switch down to a standard switch like we used to do in the manual days. It handles all the heavy lifting for you. Now, the other thing is the historical and performance data that William was talking about earlier. This is an optional step. If you decide to bring it over, this will increase your migration time, right? Because we're bringing over more data. So keep that in mind as you're considering the option for migration.
Oh, and before you go on, we also have the ability to prune some of that data too. So if you want to bring, today it's kind of black and white. It's either you get it or you don't get it. We do have a KB out there that allows you to prune that data. So let's say you have a retention period of 1 year and you really want the last 3 months of data, right? It would really be bad if you couldn't copy some of that over. So we do have a KB where you can run some jobs within your database. It'll prune that down to 3 months. And then you guys can import that over. So you get the data that you have recently, and you don't need to wait for the long duration. So that's also an option.
Right, and this is important, especially if you've been upgrading your vCenter over time. So let's say you've been upgrading this thing since like 4.0 and keep going, right? That database is going to be a big size. So it's good to kind of take a look at it and clean it up. Make sure that the roll-up jobs are running. All that kind of stuff is important. So now that we've migrated to the VCSA, what we wind up doing is we power off during the migration process the Windows vCenter server. And the reason for that is we don't want conflict, right? Because we're retaining that identity. So we're going to be able to use the same name, FQDN, IP address for the appliance like we used to for the Windows box. Now the other cool thing here is all we did was copy the data. We made no changes to the source Windows vCenter server. So as William stated earlier, now if something does happen, we can literally just power off the appliance, we can delete it from inventory, we power on the Windows vCenter server. Now one thing we'll have to do is we'll have to rejoin it back to Active Directory because during the process we did update the object within Active Directory. Now some tidbits here. Before starting the migration process, make sure you have a local account that you'll be able to log back into the Windows vCenter server in case you need to roll back for whatever reason. You'll be able to log in. Do not rely on cache credentials. Trust me, it will not, it won't work. The other thing is once the migration is done, go in and disconnect the NICs to ensure that nobody can go in and power on the Windows vCenter server by accident and cause any kind of IP conflict. All right, so now that was kind of the simple workflow. Let's go through the external workflow where we actually have platform services controllers involved. First thing we're going to do again is we're going to run the migration assistant on the platform services controller. Now that it's run, we're going to go through and we're going to run the migration tool on our jump box. It's going to go out and it's going to deploy a platform services controller for us. We're going to bring over the identity. Again, we're going to bring over all the config, the SSO config that resides, the SSO users, all that comes over. And we're going to power off that box. It automatically powers off the box. Now, one thing you've noticed probably even in the other workflow is we didn't power off Update Manager nor the database. Again, that's up to you to take care of the cleanup later on, because we're only copying the data from either the Windows vCenter server or the platform services controller. This is key right here. Do not do one platform services controller and then go and jump on and do the next vCenter server. Get all your PSCs within the SSO domain first, just like you would an upgrade. And remember that statement at the beginning where we said it's not only migration, it's also an upgrade. This goes hand in hand with it, because during an upgrade, you will do all the PSCs first within the SSO domain, and then you'll start migrating or upgrading the vCenter servers. Otherwise, you're going to run into some issues. So now that we've covered the platform services controller, we're going to do the same thing for the vCenter server. But since we have an external update manager, we're going to run the migration assistant there. Then we're going to run it on vCenter server. Now we're going to go to our jump box and we're going to run the migration tool. It's deployed an appliance for us. We're going to bring over that identity. The config and everything comes over again. And now we have our platform service controller and our vCenter server working just like they were in the Windows days, but now they're appliances and they're turned off.
And although that looked like there was a lot of steps there, it's actually harder for us to visualize it. When you actually go do it, it's actually very simple. It's literally 2 UI wizard. It's a guided wizard process that walks you through that. There's a bunch of validation. So it's actually much more complicated to try to visualize this in PowerPoint than actually run through the process. So.
Yeah, and especially if you have Update Manager living within vCenter, that's like one less step that you have to deal with. But it is pretty quick. It's pretty simple. And like I said earlier, it does all the heavy lifting for you. So before you consider doing a manual migration, I highly recommend looking at using the migration tool. Especially if you have other solutions and other things talking to vCenter, that identity is key. Because if you don't, when you rebuild, you recreate a new UUID. And now all solutions will have to be re-registered to that new vCenter server. So just keep that in mind as well. As far as automation is concerned, part of the appliance ISO, we actually have native JSON and a CLI that will take care of the life cycle of the appliance. I use this daily. I mean, that's actually the only way I deploy the VCSA today. Through the CLI, you just mount it, use the CLI installer, point to the JSON template. We have several templates there. And the template's not only for installation, but you can do migrations, you can do upgrades. It will do all that for you. The other cool thing that we introduced in 6.7 is something called batch mode, where I can take several of these templates, dump them in one directory, and it's going to go out and run them in order. So for example, if I wanted to deploy, let's say, 10 embedded nodes, I can take 10 of the JSONs, as long as I have the right JSON files, put them in a directory, and just point to that directory, and it's going to go out and deploy all 10 for me. And I come back after taking a break or doing something else, and I have 10 vCenters ready to go.
The other nice thing too, because it's a JSON file, you can source control this, right? So that's your config management. So you don't need to capture what configurations, what SSO domains. This is a nice way that you can actually store that. So if you ever need to do backup, restore, auditing purpose, you have a nice little file that's easily readable as well.
Yeah, basically you're templatizing your deployments or upgrades or migrations. And from an automation perspective, this is what the CLI will look like. You can go in, you just point to the VCSA-deploy, you can do a help, and it will list out all the parameters. You can also do it on the actual template itself, and it will provide you all the parameters as well. And William Lam, of course, has a couple of blog posts. I think you even have some other parameters that are not included as part of the OVF.
Right, yeah, so if you wanted to like, enable SSH, for example, or if you want to change the bash shell, there's a couple of other options. So basically the idea here is that you can fully automate your VCSA deployment, which you guys should be doing. Clicking's not really that fun. I don't want to have carpal tunnel syndrome, so yeah, so definitely multi-platform, really easy to use. So definitely take a look at it if you guys haven't tried it before.
Yeah, and what's cool is I've done several migrations using the CLI. I recommend going through the UI at least the first time, just so you kind of know the process and the steps. But if you have several migrations to do, this is a good way of doing it as well.
All right, so now that Emad kind of went through a high level and you guys kind of understand how the migration works, there's a couple of things to consider as part of post-migration. Emad kind of lightly mentioned on this round is around disconnecting the source Windows VC. Like you said, we power off the VM for you to ensure that you guys don't have a network conflict. But we've actually had some customer accidentally power back on the source Windows VMs and then automatically cause impact to their vCenter production environment. So one additional step you guys can take is to disconnect the network. That way if the VM does get powered on, there's no conflicts on the network. Log into the vSphere client. Validate that everything looks fine. All your plugins are fully registered. Some of the solutions, especially for third parties, you may have to go in and basically refresh the connectivity purposes. So before you start deploying VMs or returning the environment back to production, these are some basic sanity checks you want to also run through. And then lastly, as we mentioned earlier, migration is both a migration as well as an upgrade. So because it's an upgrade, also consider that this is purely covering the vCenter portion of it. Look at the VMs, if you need to upgrade the hardware and any other solutions around that. So definitely consider the interop matrix and follow the entire upgrade process. So don't just do the migration and assume that everything's functional, because there may be solutions like NSX, VRA that may not be compatible. So you also need to go through that upgrade process. And then lastly, topology changes. In the earlier releases, and we'll spend a little bit more time talking about topology changes, prior to 6.7 and 6.7 U1, if you wanted to make a change to your topology, whether it's embedded or external, you had to do it up front. And if you didn't make those changes then, you're pretty much locked in for that particular configuration. And really the point here is that we want you to move forward to the appliance. Any of the topology changes, and we'll spend more time on that, can be remediated at the end. And so this is a post-deployment change, which is a big change from what we had today, which is sort of you had to do the topology change up front and then perform the migration. Okay, so topology changes. The first one that we hear a lot about is around horizontal migration. And just as a reminder of what that really means is I have a Windows VC.
Before you take the picture, wait until the animation is done, and then take whatever pictures you want.
You signed me up for failure, man. So Windows vCenter 6.7, and I want to go to the appliance that's also running 6.7. Now, if you remember earlier, we mentioned that a migration is both a migration as well as an upgrade. So in this case, because both versions are already on 6.7, we can't actually perform the migration itself. So now you guys can actually take a picture. Having said that, if you guys attended our session together last year, we actually talked about numerous ways of how you can actually accomplish this migration, leveraging a lot of automation. Oftentimes, customers really just want to get the VMs across. And so we wrote a lot of scripts last year to actually help with this. And there's a lot of tips and tricks. So you should definitely check out our session from last VMworld that talks about some of the tricks that you can leverage to be able to help you migrate from this particular scenario. What I would like to add to that is that we leverage a lot of the cross vCenter vMotion capability. As a reminder, starting from vSphere 6.0 and greater, you can now migrate a VM to a different vCenter server, and leveraging the APIs, you can actually migrate VMs across different vCenter SSO domains. Now I'll just repeat that one more time. In 6.0 or greater, you can migrate a VM across different SSO domains. It doesn't care about your topology. It's not even aware of the underlying SSO domain. And the reason a lot of you guys might be wondering, like, well, don't we always have to be in the same SSO domain? It's really a limitation of our vSphere H5 client, where we can only allow you to do a migration using the UI, and that needs to be in the same SSO domain. The underlying vMotion API never had that restriction. And so I've written a number of scripts leveraging the APIs. We actually have that functionality built into the Power CLI move VM commandlet. So just a couple of PowerShell lines of code, I can move a VM between one VC in one particular SSO domain to another VC on a completely SSO domain seamlessly. And the reason I bring this particular utility up, which is a fling that I worked on, is that today the migration for cross SSO domain, it's only API only, right? So you have to use the CLI. We actually built a nice little UI that's multi-platform, and it allows you to bulk migrate VMs and you just register different VCs. So in the source and target, you can actually register multiple vCenter servers, select the VMs, data store, and then click migrate. Under the hood, we're then using the underlying vMotion APIs to initiate that process. And so this is actually something that a lot of customers have been using. We've seen a lot of data center evacuation, data center consolidation, just movement of VMs, and it's a really nice capability for vMotion that you guys have had access since 6.0. We've also added a nice REST API on top of that. So again, going through the UI once is fun and all, but if you're trying to migrate 8,000 VMs, which we had a customer do a couple of months back, this is really not the process, right? So they end up using the simplified REST API, specify the VMs that they want to migrate, and their customers and the app owners weren't even aware that they've switched to a completely different platform. You might be going from an upgrade environment where the hardware is not powerful and you want to go to a newer version. So that's a nice way, rather than trying to upgrade the existing infrastructure, you would just build out brand new infrastructure, leverage this utility or just the vMotion APIs and move your workloads across. And so think about this as you guys look at through your upgrade process. If you're still on 6.0, 6.5, and you really want to be at 6.7, which is where a lot of the new capabilities are, rather than going through the painful process of upgrading it, you can actually just move your workloads across. Okay, so the next topic is convergence.
Convergence? What are you talking about?
You don't know what convergence is? Okay. Yeah, we like to make a bunch of weird names, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So if you guys remember earlier, we have kind of two deployment models today for VCSA. We can deploy the single embedded appliance, very simple, easy to use, easy to manage, great backup solution. Or you can also deploy a vCenter with an external PSC. Historically, you kind of had to choose between the two, simplicity over functionality. And what I mean by functionality is that one of the core reasons of why you might want to do an external PSC is really to get the benefit of enhanced link mode, which is being able to join multiple vCenters into a common SSO domain so that within a vSphere H5 client perspective, you can see all your VCs, you can perform cross vCenter vMotion, you have tag sharings. And so those were the really two reasons. And we kind of forced you to choose between the two, right? Simplified deployment or enhanced link mode. And with 6.7, we actually remediated that particular challenge and support the ability to do enhanced link mode between an embedded appliance. And once we added that capability, and this is also true for 6.5 update 2, so not just 6.7, there's really no good reason to do an external PSC. And in fact, we actually discourage this, and going forward, our preferred architecture is really an embedded appliance for all the reasons I've spoke of before. And I think that's also feedback from what you guys have been telling us too, which is we want this to be simple, we want a nice backup story, and having the external PSC doesn't really add any value to that. And longer term, you'll see the PSC, kind of going away and being a less important service. Longer term, it'll just be part of vCenter.
Who here is in this deployment model today external? Okay.
And do you guys want to go all to the embedded appliance?
Yeah.
Yep, awesome. Yeah, so this is actually new.
All right.
All right, so we start with this configuration. We then have a convergence tool. And with 6.7 U1, we now have the ability to converge an external deployment to an embedded deployment. This is something that you guys have been asking about. We've been working with PM and engineering and really trying to get this out as soon as we can, and we want to make sure that we want to simplify your guys' deployment mechanism. So again, point earlier is that get to the VCSA. We will help you get to the desired topology. So similarly to the installation or the migration, this is all bundled within the VCSA, and this will be available as of 6.7 U1. And we have a new directory called Converge CLI. And it works exactly the same, just like the installation CLI. Uses the same JSON format, similar help functionality. And the idea here is that you can automate this process using the CLI. There's some remediation and pre-checks that's automatically built in. Multi-platform support, but the requirement here, again, just to reiterate, is that you need to be on 6.7 update 1. So go ahead and do either an upgrade or a migration, depending on where you're at. And once you get to 6.7 U1, you then have the ability to converge your infrastructure.
The other thing I want to add here is if you're using a load balancer for HA for the PSCs, it doesn't matter. This tool will still work and get you to embed it. What winds up happening is it will take the VIP and you can now come back in. So it doesn't matter whether load balancer or no load balancer, we'll still support it.
Yep. So you can see here's a screenshot of the two commands. We have the new converge and then also a decommission. Obviously the decommission will be for like the PSC, and we'll go through a quick workflow. So here we have two vCenters with a PSC. We want to start by making sure we back up before we start. We start with our jump server, just like previous workflows. We start up the Convergence CLI. We then connect to one of our VCSA appliances. And what we're doing here is because this vCenter doesn't have any of the PSC binaries, right? Because that all lives in the external PSC. We then take the RPMs and we go ahead and install that onto your source VCSA. Once we do that, we then have a VCSA that has an embedded PSC. We then set up replication between the new embedded PSC with your external PSC. That way, all the configurations are all synced up. And then we repeat the process for the second VCSA. So you can see at this point, the external PSC is still running. It's connected to both your external PSC, and I'll call that VC2, and also to your new embedded VCSA. And if you had more VCs, you would repeat this process.
This is probably the only time we will support an embedded deployment replicating to an external PSC.
So now we connect to our second VCSA. We do the exact same thing again. We take those PSC RPMs. We go ahead and upload that to the appliance, and we perform the installation. Now we have our second embedded PSC. And you can see that these two now have connectivity between the two from a PSC standpoint. So we have the SSO domains linked. We have tags, inventory information being replicated.
Well, I have a question for you.
Yep.
Why did you point to the first PSC within the embedded deployment and not to the external one?
That's a good question. So if we don't do that, when we go in and decommission the external PSC, you've now created an island between these two VCs, right? So you really want to make sure that when it asks you to prompt for the PSC that you want to join your first embedded appliance. We go in and set up replication again between the two VCs. And then at this point, we have our kind of desired state, but we still have this PSC kind of lingering around, right? So using the exact same Converge utility, we then run the decommission workflow. And what that does is go ahead and unregister itself from the other two internal PSCs, and then automatically powers off the VM.
Now, one little tidbit here is before you decommission the external PSC, you probably have other solutions that leverage it, like SRM or VROPS or NSX for authentication. So make sure before you decommission that you re-register them with the embedded deployments and then decommission the external PSC.
And then at the end of that, we now have two VCs that initially started with an external PSC, and we now get to a much more simplified deployment. You now have the benefit of enhanced linked mode fully supported. We won't go into like a workflow for load balancers, but we do have a number of customers who do use a load balancer front-ending multiple PSCs. And here, the point that we want to make across is that you can converge this as well, even with the load balance in between, and you simply just have to specify the load balancer's VIP, and we will automatically discover the back-end PSCs and do the appropriate convergence for you. Okay, I hand over to.
Good. All right, so we just converted, but sometimes we have situations where, let's say we have isolation from domains, the way we deployed it. So let's say I deployed a vSphere.local, and now I deploy my second vCenter, but instead of selecting existing SSO domain, I select new, but I keep the same vSphere.local SSO domain. So now they're both vSphere.local, but yet they are not together. They're separate, right? So we now introduce tooling that will help us bring these two domains together if need be, or we can split them if need be. So let's take this example here. So, right here you got Younis.local, which is my lab, and then you got vGhetto.local, which is William's lab, and we were working on a project together. And if you notice, our domains are separate, but he's got some inventory, I got some inventory, and we wanted to kind of bring everything together and just leverage it for this project.
So you want to combine forces?
For the time being.
Okay, all right, cool.
So the goal was one single SSO domain. And we played a game of rock, paper, scissors, and of course William won, and we decided on vGhetto.local. So what we ended up doing was we were using the CMSSO util domain repoint command to be able to repoint my vCenter server into his SSO domain. Now, the thing here is we are bringing over almost everything things like our local SSO users, I wind up losing, right? Because they're tied to my SSO domain and I'm going to his SSO domain. So keep that in mind. And by simply doing this, I've not only consolidated the SSO domain into one, but we also established enhanced link mode as well. But, you know, the project has to end at some point, right? And we now are going to part ways because we want to split, and now I want to use my own lab, William wants to use his own lab, and no longer log in, you know, and see all our inventory and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it just wasn't working out, man.
It wasn't.
It just wasn't working out. Sorry, man. He was a bad tenant. Leaving VMs, snapshot all over the damn place. I had to clean it up after him.
It could be worse. You could be like William and use resource pools like folders, right?
Oh, low blow, buddy, low blow. I see what you did there, buddy. We'll talk afterwards.
I'm going to the principal's office now. All right. So what we wind up doing, again, same thing, same utility, right? But this time I'm doing the opposite. I'm repointing to my own domain, and it splits the two domains. So basically what we're saying is, like earlier, is you have the tooling in 6.7 update 1 to not only, you know, go from external to embedded, bring domains together, split domains. So this is really the update that will get you to the proper topology that you need. But the goal here is just upgrade as you are now. Don't make any changes. Get the 6.7 update 1. And now after post-migration, post-upgrade, make the necessary changes that you need.
And just to kind of help put this into perspective a little bit, you know, we're kind of joking around with this environment, but if you think about real life scenarios, for the first use case here, think about acquisitions. We actually have a lot of customers that go through a number of acquisitions. You now have disparate infrastructure. How do you want to manage that? Do you want to manage it separately? Do you want to have duplication of admin tags and all the information? So the first use case, we're allowed to take these different disparate environments, unify them under a single corporate identity configuration, right? So not only do you do that from a manageability standpoint, but now you have a single pane of glass for your infrastructure. So that's really the first use case, and we see a lot of that for acquisitions. I don't know what's the reverse was, like de-acquisition? Is that what it is, or something like that? You know, companies split up. That happens all the time. We actually have a number of customers been asking for this capability, and this is the first time we're officially supporting this in 6.7 update 1. If you go to my blog, I have some ways of doing this prior to 6.7 U1, where we have a VCs that's set up in an linked mode, and we need to actually break up that infrastructure. Whether it's for scaling, sizing, BUs, changes in the business corporations where we actually need to split up the company. These are real actual use cases we have from our customers. This was actually never possible before from an official standpoint. And so in 6.7 U1, we have the ability to take this and actually split the domains. And so the idea is we're really giving you guys choice. You know, there are going to be changes in your business, and we want to make sure that we don't have any technical gaps that prevent you from moving as fast as you need to for your businesses. So really, this is the actual practical use case for these two scenarios.
Yeah, and then keep in mind, the boundary here is now the SSO domain, and we support up to 15 vCenter servers within an SSO domain. So when we go from external, where we have to kind of count the number of PSCs, we support 10 PSCs, and then SSO domain, and then 15 vCenters. Now the number changes. It's just 15 vCenters within an SSO domain, and keep that in mind as you're repointing and moving things in and out. And with that, we welcome any questions.
Oh, if we can ask you if you can just come up to the mic, since this is just being recorded. Thank you.
During the migration, is it possible to change the name? Upgrade and migration of a vCenter. What if I want to change the name?
So the question is, if I want to change the name of a vCenter during upgrade or migration, can I do it? And the answer to that is no, you cannot change the FQDN. Once the vCenter is deployed with that FQDN, it's bound to it. So the only way to basically, I guess, change the name would be to deploy a new vCenter server with a new name, and then use the utilities that William was talking about earlier to move the VMs across.
Now, having said that, it is definitely something that we hear a lot about, and so it is something that we're potentially considering. I don't know if Sandeep is in the room or not. Raise your hand. He is the product manager for the VCSA. Stand up, don't be shy. They won't bite much. Okay. We'll make sure that we provide that feedback, but it's definitely something we've heard, but not possible today. Yeah. Let's go over here and then.
I have two questions. Is it okay to upgrade and still leave my ESXi hosts on version 6.5 update 1?
Yes.
And will that be safe for how long? I mean, someday I've got to update my hosts, right?
As long as it's fully supported, so look at our interop matrix, right? So 6.7 supports 6.5, so you're perfectly fine in that standpoint. We obviously do recommend that you do upgrade your hypervisors, get to the latest version, bug fixes and all that. So as long as you follow the interop matrix, you can leave those hosts not upgraded until you're ready to move forward with those.
You just won't get any of the new enhancements by doing so.
The other thing is I have 2 clusters, one's VDI, one's servers. I have 2 vCenters. Can I migrate and update both of these without cost? Or I don't have a platform service controller. Is it okay to upgrade both of these? It won't harm anything?
Yeah.
They'll still talk to each other. It'll be great.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so I have a couple questions. So in our environment, we've got a ton of permissions, like Active Directory permissions. And the migration, those will come over?
Yep.
Okay, and second question is, during the migration, at some point, like you said, the Windows vCenter will, or the appliance will change the Windows vCenter and add it to the Active Directory again. Mm-hmm. I don't have Active Directory like domain admins. I've got, add a computer to the domain, create computer accounts. Is that going to do it, or am I going to need some other type of permission?
There is, I believe, a KB out there that gives you the list of permissions needed. If you can't find it, just ping me and I'll point you to it.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a question for customers who are looking to do more of a side-by-side type migration. I've used your blog, by the way, for a lot of the virtual distributed switch stuff. And I was wondering if you guys are planning on supporting any tools to kind of take pieces of an old environment and do a migration that way. Mainly a virtual distributed switch to a local switch tool.
There's not currently any plans to do so. I think there's, I've run a number of scripts and there's definitely a bunch of other solutions, but there's nothing in plan and all that. So we'll definitely let the product manager know, but nothing in plan.
Fantastic, and thanks for your blog again.
Yeah, no worries.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hello.
So we're planning to go to deploy NSX within 3 months probably, right? So they recommend us to migrate, from Windows vCenter to appliances, right? But the problem is that we have this Cisco virtual switches, the 1000Vs, right? So the Cisco virtual switches 1000V. So I cannot go further than.
You should use the VDS.
Yeah, so I cannot go over 6.5 update 1, right? I cannot further than that, right? So my question is for you guys is what do you recommend me to, because we want to, of course, go to use appliances instead of Windows.
No, it's a great question. The reason I mentioned VMware VDS, not because it's really awesome, but there's also a migration tool that will actually help you migrate from N1KV over to the VMware VDS, preserving all your configuration settings. Exactly. This was actually developed out of our NSBU. If you reach out to your account team, they will show you the tooling. That tool will then help you move to the VDS. Once you're 100% on the VDS, you can then proceed with the migration process, and then you can register NSX post-migration.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, hi, we're on 5.5 still, so I was wondering if there was any migration
so you're that guy.
tools to go from 5.5, and obviously we have to go to 6 first.
Right. Yeah.
So from 5.5, you can, as far as migration, from 5.5 you can go either to 6.0 using the tool, or you can go directly to 6.5.
Okay, so the migration tool does support 5.5.
It does, but let me like preface this. Make sure you go out and look at the release notes, because there are certain versions of 5.5 that are supported with, so you have to be on certain either 5.5 update you something or patch whatever. So look at the release notes to make sure that the destination, whatever version you're going to, is a supported upgrade or migration path. We actually have a section within the release notes now that says upgrade and migration. So definitely take a look at that.
Yeah, just to clarify, like 6.0 and going forward, we have a migration tool in each of these releases. So any of those versions would support 5.5. So just take a look at where you want to be at. But if you want to go straight to 6.7, we don't have the support for 5.5. So you would have to do it.
I have to go to 6.0 first before I go to 6.5.
No, you can go.
You can go directly to 6.5.
Go directly to 6.5. But if your goal is, let's say, to change your topology and all that, you would go to 6.5, and then from 6.5, depending on if you went to GA or update 2. So if you went to, let's say, 6.5 GA, you would then have to go to 6.7, right? and then update 1, or 6.7 update 1 directly. And then if you went to, let's say, 6.5 update 2, you'd have to go to 6.7 update 1. So
Yeah,
kind
that
of
was
the
in that
slide that
table
we showed earlier.
Exactly. So definitely look at the interrupt matrix, and that'll give you kind of destination.
Yep.
Hello. So today we have 4 vCenters in linked mode with an external PSC. So the first step would be to break link mode and then move on.
No. So are you on 6.0 or 6.5?
Yeah, we're on 6.0 update 3.
Okay, so remember in 6.0 now we establish enhanced link mode by simply just having that external deployment.
Okay.
So the first step is just migrating that PSC first, and then going through and migrating all your vCenter servers, and you'll come across in the same topology that you came in.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
I had a question about replicating PSCs.
Mm-hmm.
I had to manually set up some replication between PSCs, but I got wrong information and pointed it to a PSC that was a member of a different site. But because it was the only replica record, it wouldn't let me remove it. So once you set a replication target for a PSC, if it's the only one, you physically can't remove it. And that became a real problem because I was attempting to replicate to the wrong place. Is that something that has been addressed or rectified or looked at, or?
If there's still a single PSC, then you cannot. You basically have to kind of play musical PSC chairs, and you have to create another one and repoint, and then you can decommission it.
That's what I ended up doing.
Yep.
So, okay, thank you.
Yep.
So we're on 6.0 update 3, also Windows with the embedded PSC. What does the workflow look like for migrating to the virtual appliance?
Same thing. I mean, basically, you're just going to run the migration assistant first on that embedded deployment.
Okay.
And then from a remote machine, you'll run the tool, and you'll just come right across as embedded.
Is there a migration tool like that for going to 6.5? Because we're on 1000 Vs also.
Okay, so if you're on 1000 Vs, as William stated earlier, first things first, go use the migration tool that's dedicated to getting from 1000 V to the VDS, and then do the Windows to appliance migration.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, can I move the ESXi host from the VCSA 6.0 to another new vCenter? It's a VCSA 6.7. It is configured with the VDS too. Does that make any difference, moving?
Wait, you want to move your hosts?
Host to a new vCenter.
Yeah, you can do it. You just unregister and
the VDS configuration will...
well, so the VDS won't cover, right? Yeah. So you can disconnect and you can reconnect. You'll have to rebuild the VDS. So there's a lot of automation that I've written and other folks. And so the high-level workflow, I mean, this is not really a VCSA migration anymore. It's really a host migration. So you need to rebuild your VDS on the destination, right? And once you detach, depending on the number of PNICs that you have, you can reattach, rejoin the new VDS, because if you don't follow a particular workflow, you will break connectivity, especially if you have management traffic on the...
And the other thing is, don't use the export of the VDS from 6.5 and try to import it to 6.7.
No, no.
That's not
I already created the new VDS, same way in the existing vCenter. So then I move it, ESXi host, so it should work, right?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're, I would say, you go in and you disconnect and bring it up to the other one, and that's it.
And also the old vCenter is external PSC. The new one is embedded, so it doesn't make any difference.
It doesn't make a
Remember
difference.
that PSC is there for SSO, like authentication, certificate management, things like that. It doesn't have any effect on any of these migrations.
Okay.
And just another tip, don't test in production. Test us out.
Come on, man. Live dangerously.
So I'm one of the 5.5 guys.
But I feel like this is a support group.
We're going to meet out back later.
Yeah.
So I've got new hardware, and instead I was going to stand up like a new environment and then migrate the VMs.
Right.
So I use Cisco UCS, and I've got a SAN. So do I need to create new data stores to be on VMFS6, or can I just leave everything on the same data stores once my new environment's up, migrate them over?
So you're on 5.5. The VMFS is 5x.
Yeah.
So you would have, last I remember, you would have to basically create new VMFS volumes
stores,
and then do the migration that way, like storage vMotion.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm wondering if your Windows Virtual Center and external PSC are running on Acropolis, if your migration tool will work in that scenario.
Sorry, I didn't get that last part. If it was running on what?
Acropolis.
I guess Nutanix, right?
Nutanix.
Yes.
Oh, if it's running on a, yeah. We actually don't care about the underlying thing that's hosting it.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it should work.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a 5.5 question for you, right? I have vCenter 5.5, I have ESXi 5.5, I have about 600 VMs on 5.5. I take one ESXi host and deploy 6.7 on it, not ESX, but just vCenter. What's the best way to migrate all those VMs without downtime, given the fact that the shared storage is still going to be the same? So is this going to be as simple as browse a data store, unregister from this vCenter, add them to the new vCenter? Or do you have anything a lot better to do it, or a lot more automated way to do this kind of stuff?
I would say the best option is to at least get to 6.0 and 6.0 update 3 at a minimum. And then once you have presence on 6.0 update 3, you can then leverage the cross vCenter vMotion. And as long as your networking is set up appropriately, then you can do migrations without any downtime. But if you're stuck on 5.5, you don't really have an option, and you're going to have to take downtime on the virtual machines.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Hey guys,
and remember, it
question.
expires in September 19th, less than a month's time.
I'm just curious. We're getting a lot of like manual migration questions, so I'm just wondering, like, you guys, we just covered a whole session on the tool, so please look at the tool first before you start doing all this stuff and then getting yourself in a situation where you've created a lot more work for yourselves. And
so definitely look at automation. I mean, unless you guys want to do hard, busy work and all that, just
click.
Yeah.
Hey guys, another question. So we have two data centers, right? And we have one vCenter running in each, right? They're Windows vCenters, and of course they have they have link mode, and we have embedded PSCs, right? But I was told that it might not be a valid configuration. That I was probably supposed to have an external PSC for that to work. So I was wondering if that's correct, and what would you guys recommend me, especially when I'm trying to move to an appliance.
What version are you on?
6.5.1, update 1.
Just go to update 2 and you'll be fine.
Yeah. So we've been talking to the PM, and we are in the process to try to get all this validated. But until then, we're kind of, I guess, in a state of
flux.
Yeah.
Sandeep, where are you at?
I mean, theoretically, just getting to, I mean, he says it jokingly, but getting to 6.5 update 2, now you're in a supported configuration. But when we announced 6.5 update 2 for embedded link mode and 6.7 GA for it, it was for greenfield deployments. And then everything that me and William covered here was more for the brownfield side tooling, right?
Yeah. What if I go to then what if I started with an external PSC, and then from
I was going to say that was the other option, is that we have the ability to go from an embedded to an external. So if you wanted to be in a fully compliant configuration, before you move to like something like 6.7 U1, then you can, for each of those, spin out, create an external PSC, and you would still have the same configuration. I would
say wait until the bits are out and look at the release notes and see if we support that.
Okay.
If we do, then you're good. If we don't, then do that. That way you don't go do it now and then realize, oh man, they now support it and I did all that work for nothing. So I would wait until the bits are available, look at the release notes, and then you can make a decision.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yep. I guess. You're on Windows vCenters? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. So for that's only appliance. So the embedded is only, that's a good point. It's only for the appliances. And everything here we talked about is only for the appliance. Yeah. Okay.
Well, our external PSC is on a server that's co-located with our backup server. So we couldn't use the migration tool because it's going to power it off. What steps would we need to take prior to using the migration tool in order to move that PSC?
Sorry, I didn't get that part. Could you repeat that environment setup again?
The PSC is co-located on a backup server, a physical server, right now.
Okay.
And it can't be powered off.
Oh, you mean you have the backup server running on the PSC?
No. The PSC is running on a Windows server that's the backup server also.
Right, okay. Same difference. Same difference, right? I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. Okay, yeah.
So what would we need to do prior to running the migration tool so that it doesn't power off that server, obviously.
I have so many questions.
Do you test backups? No.
I mean, part of me wants to say, like, deploy another PSC, point it to that PSC, and, like,
instead of replication, that would
Repoint.
try to get yourself out of, so that way you can shut this thing down, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking. I just wondered if that was your
Don't
recommendation.
do this ever again.
It's a good question, though.
Our current database is on Microsoft SQL, but do y'all have a recommended or better database that y'all like to use with the VM?
For vCenter, you mean?
Yeah, for vCenter.
Well, the good thing about the appliance is that we actually have our own internal embedded vPostgres database. And so from a database point, and that's actually one of the benefits of going to the appliance, is that you no longer have to have a database, external vendor, you don't have to pay for the license, that's all handled for you. So you actually don't even have choice in that. So as you go through the migration, we will take all that data out of your SQL database, put it into our vPostgres database, which scales to the maximums. You don't have to worry about managing databases, backups, all that just goes away.
Excellent. Thank you.
Actually, I have a session tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Myself and Rebecca Fitzhugh, we're going to talk about availability and recoverability for the vCenter Server Appliance. 8 a.m.
Any other last questions? And if we can also ask you guys to fill out the survey, let us know what worked. You know, if you guys want to see other things in the future, you know, that's a good way to give us feedback. Really, thank you.
Thank you so much.